Det här är Kongress News för vecka 21-23 maj år 2021. Denna vecka uppföljs av den senaste nyhetsartikeln från den globala underrättelseenheten i Kongress WBN med titeln Intensifikation i jordens system. Kortfattat, den senaste nyhetsartikeln blickar på intensifikationen som en beskrivning av både vad som äger rum bland oss då Kongress WBN rör sig framåt och vad som förekommer i jordens system. Denna vecka börjar med att vi blickar på den första delen i den speciella GIU-serien som tittar närmare på världens tillstånd och Guds utvecklande syften mitt i krisen. Marlon Jameson, som är verkställande direktör för Dr. Woodruff, presenterar den första delen av vår GIU-artikel med titeln Tidernas tillstånd, den globala pandemin.
We want to look at 5 interrelated core areas of the crisis. And it's important for us to know that each of these components of the crisis, they don't stand on their own. They are actually working in concert one with the other. They are interrelated. The 5 things we're going to be looking at would be the coronavirus pandemic, the stagnation of the global economy, which will affect every nation, the unstable balance of power that is now emerging among the nations, the rising international conflicts that are now appearing on the international scene, and also the rise of a global protest culture. And we're going to be looking at these 5 things very briefly, just to give us a scan of the state of the times. Let's begin with the coronavirus pandemic. While some nations have been celebrating the fact that they are now vaccinating their populations, a few nations have recorded infection rates that are actually slowing down. But looked at a global scale, if you look at the global infection rate, the coronavirus is not slowing down, it's actually accelerating. And that makes this problem much more complex than what might present on the media, depending on what part of the world you are in. But the pandemic, the interesting thing about the coronavirus pandemic is that it presents itself as a health crisis, but is actually creating an existential crisis. When I say an existential crisis, I mean that it is changing in very fundamental ways how human beings live and how we exist. And this is generally referred to as the COVID effect. And it involves a number of factors beyond health that will continue to change the way in which we live. For instance, we have significant economic strain that is being brought upon not only governments as they try to manage their economies, but also families, because income is drying up. Financial strain is coming to rest upon individuals and families. The coronavirus pandemic has also accentuated class divisions within societies because not everyone can manage to endure the lockdown conditions which have been deemed necessary in order to deal with the effects of the crisis. And the more time is spent locked down, is the greater the gap between those who have and those who do not. The reality of the coronavirus and the urgency of its effect upon societies is also delaying the treatment of other health crises that were pre-existing before the coronavirus pandemic hit, which will create for us rising health costs even after, if we do in fact deal with the reality of the coronavirus. Education has also been a victim of the conditions. The UN is now talking about the lost generation of children whose education has been cut short by this protracted crisis. Poverty is being increased. The World Bank reports that more than 100 million people now live on less than $2 per day. And of course, the higher rates of poverty will lead to higher instances of crime. These are just a few of the things that are affecting nations that has been brought about by one thing that we call the coronavirus pandemic, but which is affecting so many other things. On the international level, strains are beginning to appear created by the coronavirus pandemic. Immigration issues as people flee the nations where there are limited resources to find support and help in nations that they believe to have more resources. Global cooperation is being weakened as institutions like the UN and the World Bank are proving to be ineffective to deal with the urgency of the matters facing the nations. Increasing divisions among nations, you have increasing inequalities, differences between rich nations and poor nations. The global economy, which we look at just now, is being massively impacted. And of course, global instability and the balance of power, how nations relate to one another. All of these things are being affected by the coronavirus pandemic. And that's just one area of the crisis that is facing the nations of the earth.
Nästa vecka kommer vi att fortsätta med del 2 av denna insiktsfulla GIU-nyhetsartikel Tidernas tillstånd, den globala pandemin. Håll utkik! Kom ihåg, du kan också besöka hemsidan www.kongresswbn.news/GIU för att läsa mer om intensifikation i jordens system och andra nyhetsartiklar från GIU. Veckans skrift kommer från Jakobsbrevet kapitel 1, vers 4. Det står: och uthålligheten för med sig fullkomlighet i det ni gör, så att ni blir fullkomliga och utan brist. Det var Kongress News för vecka 21, 23 maj 2021.